Today's video is inspired by Damon Cassidy's recent video about kind of the comparison between the different generations and why there's a certain amount of repetitiveness in the bad and good things that happen, and then why each generation generally tends to think that they're in the unique position of being in the most horrible time in the history of the world. And it's important to look at those and keep that in mind, because I'm getting to a point that contradicts that here in a second. So stay with me. I'm getting there, but I want to cover both sides fairly. It is important to keep a look at history so that you can put what's happening to you into the proper perspective. When you look back at some of the things that previous generations had to go through, I think World War II is, one of the most horrible things that has ever happened in human history. And the people who had to live through that went through way harder stuff than those of us who are living through the current economic and, societal problems that we're having right now. I mean, they just kind of did. Those who went off to war risked death at every turn, sort of. I mean, the statistics say that, at least in World War II, the number of battles that individual people went through was far less than, say, in like Vietnam. But a lot of people died, and a lot more people died during World War II than died during subsequent wars. So the chances of you dying back in the day were quite a bit higher, and I would say that those stakes are quite a lot more than losing your job and your career not going where you wanted to go. Now, that being said, it is important to not just fixate on one aspect of any conversation, because no thing that you talk about ever just has one part to it. There's always multiple sides, multiple facets. It's a diamond, and you have to be able to turn the thing around and look at it from different perspectives to see all of the different facets so that you can fully understand what it is that you're looking at. And this is why modern discourse tends to be so polarized, and it tends to have a lot of misinformation in it. It's not because people are spitting out lies to you all the time. It's just that they're really focused on the facet that they're most interested in, and they ignore everything else, and it skews what you think about the situation because you're not getting all parts of it. And this is why I always advocate for people to listen to as many different people as you can about a subject so that you can get all the different opinions that are out there and then form your own judgment on the diamond you're looking at based off of the entire spectrum of everything. So why am I saying this right now in relation to this? It's because I agree that it is very important to look at the past. And he didn't say, he's not on the side of the past had to go through it. He believes in what I'm about to say now. You can't just look at the past and say, oh, well, other generations might have had it harder in this way, and this is just the same kind of stuff. You're just going through the same things that everybody else went through, because that particular thought process mirrors why certain other things in our existence tend to fail. Things like socialism, things like massive government, things like communism, things that put the welfare of the community ahead of the individual in a way that's far outbalanced from what actually works. Now, why do I say that? Because regardless of what the utopians of the left side of the spectrum want you to think, we are not ants. We are not a communal entity that are all just each of us is just a small part of a big whole. We are all individuals with our own dreams, aspirations, goals, and things that we want for our lives that may not align with what is necessarily 100% the best for your community or your city or your country. And you can't ignore that as part of the equation, because the fact that we are individuals does matter. As an individual, you can look back on the past and see that every generation went through some kind of hardship. But right now, you as an individual are going through this hardship. And because you are an individual and because we are emotional creatures, there is no way to only look back at the past and say, well, this is just another iteration of the same thing, because no, you are going through it right now. So any discussion about how we are going to fix things for the future needs to keep this in mind. We need to keep in mind that these broad concepts that we talk about are, yes, broad concepts, but they include millions upon millions of individual people. And each person is suffering through the consequences of decisions that are being made. And it's not like it's easy to just write off people's lives because you don't know them and there's just so many of them. But you have to keep that in mind. It's millions of people with lives that are just as important and just as unique and just as complex as your life is. And to them, it's just as important for them as yours is to you. Whether you're an uber rich millionaire, or you drive a truck for a living, or you're in government, or whatever it is that you're doing, every single person who exists on this planet has the same amount of stuff attached to them as you do. When you take away all the material sides of things, they are a person with an individual life, with individual desires and goals and dreams and all of these things. Sorry, I keep tapping my desk. The same way, in the same way that you do. And until we can start getting people to really understand that, not just like say, oh yeah, I intellectually get it, but to have a concept of how incredibly, like, the magnitude of how incredibly ridiculous that all that is, we're going to continue to struggle and go through these endless cycles, because people are going to continue making decisions based off of what's best for me as an individual, because I can't see that this random person walking down the street actually has a very complex life that's just as important to them as mine is to me. Right? And we place our life ahead of everyone else's life, which is natural. But at the same time, we need to find a balance. We need to find a balance of saying, you know what? This history is what it is, but we can change it by learning from that history, not just repeating it and not just saying, well, it is what it is. Like, we can try to do something different so that it doesn't end up being the same way. But then just like, I'm not a super empathetic person, but the empathy of saying the billions of people on this planet each have the same complex, myriad facets to their life that I do. Maybe we should be making decisions that are best for each of that gives the best number of options for each individual, rather than requiring individuals to sacrifice the parts of their life for the collective good. A lot of people are going to hear that message and think of it as being selfish, and I get it. When you start thinking about placing the needs of the individual before the needs of the group, it sounds selfish when you say it that way. But the results of capitalism have showed us, at least the early parts of capitalism, obviously every system devolves into corruption and ridiculousness as it continues on, and it needs to be burned down and built back up again. But the thought of capitalism and the way that the ideal version of it works is the way that we as human beings function. Individual people identify individual issues that they are able to solve on an individual basis to provide individual benefits to other individuals around them, and it provides individual benefit to them in the form of being compensated for whatever it is that they solved. And with millions upon millions of individuals participating in individual transactions, that creates the massive, crazy economy that the United States has. It's not a collective group. It's not a small group of people making collective decisions for everybody that has made our country as great as it is. In general, those kinds of decisions have actually made things harder. And I say that in general. There are things that have made things better. Job things in the early part of the last century was objectively better for individuals. But those are things that were done because individual people needed those things to happen. It was focused on helping individual people find a better life, not what was best for the country. So that's kind of what I really wanted to get across in this video. It's that having an individualistic mindset does not necessarily make you selfish. What makes you selfish is when the decisions that you're making are intended to take from others to give to yourself. If your goal is to make as much money as you can, and the method that you choose to do that is by providing a service that is meaningful to people and helps them out, and in return you get something, right? Whether it's scalable or not, that is not a selfish endeavor, right? That is making a living. When it becomes selfish is when you decide that I am going to do this thing that is going to make me money, and if it ends up hurting people, cost of doing business. that's when it becomes selfish. There is nothing inherently selfish about individualism. It's when you stop caring about the effects of your individual actions on others that it becomes selfish. And that is what's really important. So thank you very much for watching. Hit the like button, subscribe to help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and I'll see you for the next one.